Welcome, everybody, to The Focus Show. I'm your host, Trevor Roach, joined by Janet Roach, local TV news reporter, and I'll be asking her a couple of questions. So, Janet, to start things off, first tell me about yourself.
I am a local news anchor and reporter here in Hampton Roads. I've been here for quite a few years. I anchor the 4, 5, and 6 o'clock p.m. shows at Channel 13 News Now, WVEC. And before that, I've worked at several TV stations across the country, and I'm just happy to be here.
Wow. What steps did it take for you to become such a successful journalist?
Well, it started long time ago, when I decided that I wanted to go into television news. And so at that point, when I was in college, actually it started when I was in high school. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer one day, but then I joined this organization, NFL. It had nothing to do with football. I joined this organization called National Forensic League. And I had to choose a category. It's like the debate team. And I chose to do original oratory. And what I had to do at that point was pick any subject in the world, anything. And I remember the first thing I chose was peer pressure. And I had to write an 8 to 10 minute speech about peer pressure. I had to memorize the speech. And I had to compete in tournaments giving that speech. So I would have to say the speech almost like 5 or 6 times in one day. And it would start off with like 50 competitors, and they would whittle it down until you got to the last round, and it would be like the last 7 people, and you would have first place, second place, and so on. And so I remember I won a trophy my first tournament. And so I really enjoyed doing that. And I said, I did 2 things there. I had to write, and I had to present. I had to speak. I had to present what I wrote. And that to me sounded a lot like broadcast journalism. And it was at that point, I was in 10th grade, 15 years old. That's when I decided I wanted to go into broadcast journalism. And so once I went to college, I did what I could to try to take the right classes, internships, until I was able to, graduate and get my first job.
Wow. Where did your passion come from?
Well, I just, growing up, as you know, grew up in High Point, North Carolina, and youngest of 3 kids. And I just remember as a kid, 60 Minutes, the show that we watch at the house a lot, 60 Minutes. It was like required watching. We all sat around and watched 60 Minutes. And I remember being impressed with how good the storytelling was, and how people the next day, even kids, would be talking about, I saw this on 60 Minutes, and I heard about this on 60 Minutes. Later in life, I was really impressed with Oprah Winfrey, who had the #1 talk show in the country for years. And I was inspired by her and how well she could connect to people. She had a talent in just getting people to open up and tell their stories about anything that was going on in their lives. And I was impressed with that, So those were some of the things that sort of stirred my passion and said, hey, maybe one day I can do that too.
Amazing. What did you learn from your career in journalism?
What have I learned? I tell people, when I talk to people, that I like the job because you learn so much about a lot, and you have to be a quick study. So, I might be doing a story one day about, growing gun violence in the area. Or the next day I might do something about something that's happening with health insurance. I didn't go to school in criminal justice. I didn't go to school in health. I didn't go to school in so many of the different areas that I have to cover as a journalist. But I am forced to have to learn very quickly about those topics, what I can, talk to experts, and in the process, I'm learning. And so over the years, you asked me what I've learned. I've just learned a lot about humanity. I've learned a lot about politics. I've learned a lot about various issues, whether it be medical issues, health issues, mental health. It's just, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but that's what I like about the job, because that makes it never boring, because you dip into everybody's world. So right now, I've been learning a lot about this Israeli-Hamas situation. That's something that I've heard about most of my life, but I've learned so much more just since that war started, because it's something that I have to talk about on television. I might have to interview someone who is affected by what's going on over there. Well, I want to be able to ask that person intelligent questions, so I read up on it and I have to learn about it. We have the election getting ready to come up, the November election, where every state senator and every House delegate will be up for election. Well, how do I report on that story if I don't look at some of the big issues that are facing people in Virginia? I have to learn about that. I've got to talk to the right people. I have to read, so that when I have some of the candidates maybe on our shows, or if I'm talking to a political analyst, I can ask them the proper questions because I've done my homework.
Wow, that's amazing. Most people that watch TV and they watch the news, I guess they don't know what journalists really have to go through. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. We'll be back. When we come back from the break, I'll ask you about, where did your success come from? What do I want to drink? Let's see. I think I'll get a water. Give me all the nutrients I need. Welcome back to the Focus Show, everybody. Janet, I want to ask you, what did your success come from?
I think it came from hard work, determination, motivation. I've always been a fairly driven person, wanted to succeed, so I felt like I needed to follow the proper steps in order to see my goals come true. And I guess the biggest thing is just a motivation and a drive, and just the satisfaction of knowing that maybe something that I have reported on, or an issue that I have uncovered, is helping someone. And I can give you an example. Several years ago, I did a story about the Department of Education in Virginia, and it was about dyslexia. And I had assumed that dyslexia was something that was known by teachers and administrators, something that they would know how to rectify. Well, I learned that wasn't the case, and that a lot of teachers, when they're in college, didn't even learn about what dyslexia is. And so I did a lot of research on it, and learned that 1 in 5 kids has dyslexia. Most of them are never diagnosed. So that kid that's in class that's like a C student probably would be an A student if they had gotten the proper remediation for dyslexia. So when I studied that topic, I went up to Richmond to talk to the Department of Education to find out, what they were doing about it. And I talked about some symptoms of dyslexia, which is like a reading disorder. And I talked about some of the symptoms, and I demonstrated some of those symptoms in my story. I had so many parents call me and say, oh my gosh, thank you. I now know what's wrong with my kid, or I'm now going to go get my kid tested because I didn't know that this is what you said about this symptom or that symptom. That I see that in my child, and now I know what it could possibly be. So that motivation that I was talking about, it comes from success stories like that.
Wow, that's very, very profound. I didn't know it was that much to journalism. I didn't know that there were those many. You could help that many people.
Yeah.
Many people think that journalism is just reporting the news, but it has a lot of hidden details to it that most people don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
How did your first job help shape your career?
Well, it did. Your first job in TV?
Yes.
Well, it was in Florence, South Carolina, and it was shortly after I graduated from college. I started working there, and the pay was very minimal because it was a small market, and in that market, I had to do what you all are doing. I had to shoot my own video. I had to edit all my stories. And then the equipment back then was big and bulky. And so I would be by myself. I'd get the keys to one of the news cars. I'd have to get a map, no GPS, a map, and figure out where I was going and go interview whomever had to call and set it up. And I was in an area that, I didn't know the area, so I had to figure all that out. How do I get to Darlington, South Carolina? How do I get to Lake City? How do I get to, and that was very good experience. And having to shoot and edit, and then because the news comes on every day, you're under a tight deadline. So you got to get it done. You got to set your story up. You got to go shoot your story. You got to write your story, and you have to edit your story, and then you have to be on the air by 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock.
And you didn't let any of that scare you off?
No. I had internships before when I was in college. I worked at some TV stations, one in Greensboro and one in High Point. And I would go out with reporters there, and I would watch to see how they did things. And so if they were doing a story on, I don't know, a tobacco farm, they would do their story, and then they would turn around and they would shoot like a stand-up where you see them talking, and they would turn around and say, okay, Janet, now your turn. And so I would have to come up with my own stand-up, and then I would go back to the station and write my version of the story. Their story went on the air. I would write my version, and that was a way to practice. And then I would get with a photographer and say, hey, do you mind editing this for me? And that's how I got my first reel, my first, demo tape to send to different television stations so that I could get hired. Because in this business, you have to have something on video. You can't just hand them a resume on a piece of paper and say, hire me. They want to know what you sound like on TV. They want to know what you look like. And they want to know, can you write? The second internship I had was one that was paid, and they would actually send me out on stories. Not the stories where you would see me, because they wouldn't let me do that, but it would be the shorter stories. So I would actually go out and report on smaller stories and have to come back to the station, write those stories up, and the anchors would read them on the air. And that was a lot of experience.
When you first started, did you see yourself getting this far?
Yeah, I did. I was determined. I thought that, I knew that there would be some obstacles along the way. There were times when I thought, there was a time when I didn't realize I would be doing it this long. But overall, yeah, I did.
Thank you for talking with us this afternoon, Mom. That was Janet Roach. That was the Focus Show. I'm your host, Trevor Roach. We're signing off.